Good evening and welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri.
And I'm Laura McKillop. We'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their ongoing support in bringing you our fortnightly Q&A. Tonight, we're fortunate enough to be speaking with Tom Austin from Elfin Vale Stud Kelpies.
Tom will be picking who he thinks has asked the best question for the night, and they will win a bag of Enduro high-energy food for working dogs with Real Kangaroo Meat.
Hi, Tom. How are you going?
Good, thanks, Laura. Hi, Dan.
G'day, mate. How's it going? Were you impressed? We don't even have to look down at the script for that anymore. It just rings off our tongues.
You've done well. Excellent.
How's your day, buddy?
Yeah, no, going very well. Just carting a few stock today and helping a few mates out with some livestock. So it's been good.
And talking just prior before we come live, mate, you said that prices look like they're on the up a little.
Yeah, the lamb price is certainly firming up a bit. It's certainly a long way down from where it was this time last year. But just with the supply of lambs, the numbers are starting to flow into Hamilton. There'll be over probably 50,000 there for sale tomorrow, being Wednesday, and they probably sold nearly 40 or 50,000 on Monday. So some big numbers coming through, and obviously the season's turning, even though we had that rain. But people either have to keep them now and shear them and put them into feedlots to finish their weights, or turn them off their mothers now. So this is the peak time of season down here around Hamilton.
Beautiful, mate. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do?
Yeah, so Elfin Vale Stud Kelpie's been going now since 1956. Here at Elfin, which is the family farm. I farm here with my wife and 3 children, so Millie, Poppy, and George. Millie's doing away at Ag College, and Poppy's also at Ag College, and George is completing year 11 at the moment. So all involved in the ag, and George certainly leaning towards ag, and also got his own dog, so he's very helpful around the farm. And Pip does a lot of work around the farm with the dogs and looks after the dogs every day and working with them. So it's pretty much a family affair. Hamilton, obviously, in the Western Districts, in a lovely red gum belt, pretty good country, not far from Port Fairy down south, and sort of 3.5 hours out of Melbourne, or you've got 4.5 hours to Adelaide. So pretty well centred around in Victoria, Western Victoria.
And you said family property. How long have you guys been on that place for?
Yeah, so I was 54 years, Laura. So all my life this has been home. So pretty special to be still here. Dad started the stud in 1956 and farmed all the way through there, and then now moved down to Port Fairy. But had a love for dogs and wanted to breed dogs, and probably a bit of history on the name, really. Elfin Vale. So his first dog came from Wilton Vale, and so he asked if he could have the Vale on the end. So that's where Elfin Vale came from. So the name of the property and the Vale at the end. So it's been going now for nearly 67 years. So it's pretty good, and it's nice that the kids are now the 4th generation on the property here at Elfin. Pretty much running a mixed farm operation, crossbred operation, alongside merinos as well, to produce a first cross lamb. But we still love our wool, and spent the last couple of weeks doing our own shearing, with my wife doing the classing, Millie doing the rouseabouting, and George and I shearing. So we're pretty self-contained unit, which sometimes you have to be on the farming world and save costs, because shearing's out to nearly $10 a head now. So it's pretty impressive. So it's good.
How do your dogs fit into that picture, mate, this time of year, having a family that's so ag orientated?
Yeah, so the dogs, and that's where obviously we don't do as many field days as we used to, but the breeding operation, joining bitches, we've been very lucky. Just the other day we had a litter of 10, which are about 4 weeks old. Got another litter of 4 pups, and then another litter the other day of 6. So there's nearly 20 pups there running around. So it's a big job keeping up to them, feeding them especially the bitch with 10 pups. It's a full-time job, nearly 3 feeds a day, making sure and the mother's doing a fantastic job.
And you said 54 years the stud's been there. How many litters over that that time?
Yeah, it's funny. Like we just talked there before. I've been in the truck today helping, and then got back, and one litter has to go to the vets tomorrow to get chipped and everything. So I tattooed. That litter number was 1,252. So 1,252 litters, and the other 2 litters brings us up to 1,254. So
Wow.
it's a pretty big number, and it only just manages to fit inside the ear of the puppy. So it's a little wiggle to get the tattoo gun in there. But yeah, and then we run an individual running number. So there was 4 pups in that litter, and they each have an individual number, 1 to 4, and that just helps identify, because all 4 of them are pretty identical. Beautiful red and tan colour. The female's obviously easy to tell, and then they get microchipped and get a S5 vaccination, so they're all ready to go. So they're all sold and ready to go.
And Pip looks after all the pups and the maintenance around the joint.
Yeah. Pip looks after the dogs, and I seem to just come in and fit in and do a bit of farm work in between. I've been working off farm the last 10 years, building and designing stockyards, which is a great synergism between the dogs and the yard designing. I think it helps my clients actually be able to know that the yards I'm designing are coming from livestock experience, having that understanding the dogs and the animals, and understanding that sheep psychology, stock psychology at the end of the day, and understanding their flight zones. But then in designing the yards, you're also looking at the different size of the mobs, and then that comes back to how many dogs you actually need in the yard. So still, that we often preach that one man, one dog operation is still very efficient. Having a well-designed set of yards with a good dog, you can handle a lot of stock quickly and efficiently, which I think as times become tough, that's where we keep selling dogs, because people want to get back to having good genetics. They're going to put time into their dogs. They want to know that they've got some pedigree, which I think has been our outstanding credit to us over the years of having purity along the lines there.
Actually, just when we finished dinner, we were sitting on the lounge here, and Laura and I were having a chat, and it's amazing how many how many guests we've had, and we'll be speaking to them, and they're probably, some of them even collie people, and they go, "Oh, I started off with an Elfin Vale bitch," We hear it all the time. And mate, obviously you're not your dad, but from where your dad started to where you are now, like, did he have a vision in mind? And then has the line had to change anywhere, or have you always kept, no, this is what we kind of want?
Yeah. Our vision hasn't changed. The vision of Dad from the very start was really to breed a general purpose dog that could really work in the paddock, could work in the yards. You could draft, you could drench a mob of sheep, you could shed up at shearing time and load a truck, but you could go and muster. I mean, in our particular country here at home, in the Red Gum Belt, we're pretty fortunate. Our paddocks aren't huge. Some people might have 400 to 500 acres on some outer blocks, but most of our paddocks are probably 20 to 30, 40 hectares, so not overly big. So the cast hasn't been as important, but to a lot of our other clients who are in hilly country, OMEO, cattle, it has been a factor. So the change still today, we're still trying to work what we describe is a 60-40, so 60% paddock, 40% bark, and that seems to be an ideal. You get obviously the higher end, you get your 70-30s, and then there's others you might get your 50-50s, which are more your yard dogs. But somewhere that we're still working on breeding that dog that is an all-rounder and can be used. The good trainers, I always say you can take the yard dog to the paddock, but you can't always bring the paddock into the yard. And that's because that level of eye gives that parameter to make those dogs want to cast or they keep off their sheep. And that's Dad's goals still going on. And it's funny, I went through the old box which has still got all the old pedigrees, and it may look a little bit basic, but I found them in 5 minutes. If we had a power outage, I could still go to them. There's a box here that's just got every pedigree in it for the last 56 years. And it's pretty impressive just pulling out those ones I showed you. It's funny, we keep our female names with S's, so that's the Samantha line, Samantha Socks, Sabrina, Salita. So and they're going back 30 years, those bitches. And that's where you can just pick up from them. So, so things haven't changed. Obviously, we've had a few outcrosses along the way. But like you said earlier, Dan, the people say they've had an Elfin Vale or they've got a bit of Elfin Vale, or some people want to promote it to help sell their dogs sometimes. Others don't want to promote it, but that's each to their own. But sometimes that one cross works really well. You could have a cross with an Avonpart and whatever virtues, it's a slight little bit of hybrid, and then you can go back to your main lines again and keep those line breedings going or the inbreeding going. And it's that purity that we can keep. That's what we find now, that we've, still got that purity coming through, and we can guarantee. So I select all the dogs for 90% of the people. There's only an odd few come in and hand pick them. So I've got to match the personality of the client. I've got to match the personality of the dog. And then I'm probably guaranteed that the breeding behind me is going to help pick that pup. And that's probably why I've been able to do it. We get the odd one wrong, but that's human nature. That's breeding. That's genetics. And anybody in genetics will tell you that it's not, doesn't always work.
Was there a time that you made that decision to go that way, to try and pick pups for people? And what was like the catalyst behind that?
I just think that was during COVID, nobody could travel. With Dad's always done it. Years gone by when we had no mobiles, he'd sit at the table, the phone would start ringing from 7:30 till 9 o'clock, depending what state you're in. If you're Western Australia, you'd get a phone call at probably 10 o'clock, or they've forgotten what time change it was. But the phone was always answered, and there was always a book. There's always a book beside the phone, and you take a number and talk to them. But your dad would talk to them and you'd listen and they'd see what they want, and they would match that working trait. So it's just something we've always done, and it's worked really well. And I suppose our guarantee, when you're putting a lot of money into a dog, you want to know that you've got that guarantee. So we've always guaranteed the dogs ever since the stud started. So we give a 12 months guarantee, no questions asked. If you're unhappy, you replace it in good health, and we'll deal with the dog later. And quite often we can rehome it, we can retrain it. It's opportunity, and I suppose that's one of the messages getting across to young people, new people with dogs. Genetics is great. Doesn't matter how good the genetics are, but we have to realise we have to give them the opportunity so we can realise their genetic potential. There are some wonderful dog trainers out there, far better than myself, and they can probably make a dog that's not bred to still work in the yards, because they just have a love and a passion and they want to make it. Sometimes they take a challenge. We actually have a pug here that does know how to go in the yards, and it's not very good on the cast, but can push them through the yards if you need to, if they're in the right spot. So so a good set of yards you can still work animals. Well-designed yards do work well.
Absolutely. I love the pug too. I think our biggest shapeshifter is our miniature sausage dog here.
The old sausage dogs. They can get pretty savage at times too, the old.
Oh, yeah. He doesn't have free the stuff, mate. He's not the most trustworthy fella.
Yeah. I often say to people, should we put Pepper inside? And say, well, do you want me to go inside as well, or do you want to have me in the yard? So it works well. But yeah. Have
you ever been tempted to change something, like to flip, like obviously, like you've been around that particular line with the old way for a long time. Has anything like ever happened within the industry and you thought, oh, maybe we should do something different, and go, nah, let's stick to what we do? Or have you ever been tempted?
Not completely flip it upside down, but certainly get dogs. And that one pedigree I showed you, probably reading some of your questions, I'll probably jump around and everything. But Elfinvale Ben was a really powerful dog, very strong, very arrogant. Probably not the dog that everybody would want to work, but sometimes you could have him in your pack. And then there was another dog, Elfinvale Fred, who was, so it was one cross of Glenville Jed. That's why he was black and tan. Put back over this Samantha line, and he was incredible. Like, he had a really soft mouth, so soft that he could actually carry a newborn lamb up after he shifted the paddock, and actually went back and got it. So that's pretty incredible. But he had a beautiful cast, really shotgun bark, and he's the sort of dog that you'd give to anybody. A newcomer would come on the farm, or host people would come and stay on the farm, and he'd say, well, you take Fred, and you just knew the mob of sheep would get in. Whereas Ben, they could probably come back with half the mob and probably lost their voice, or probably know that he didn't even get them in just because he'd want to take over the show and he'd run the show. So, and then sort of dogs coming through. There's another dog very similar to Ben, Elfinvale Chester, who's putting a lot of potency in the dogs. Beautiful personality. He's big. He's half human. He's always got to have a kiss on the cheek. Or a pat and shake hands before he ties up. Even if he's been a bad boy, he'll still go and sit at his kennel, wait to be tied up, shake hands, give a kiss, and we'll see you tomorrow, sort of thing. And he's the sort of dog that Pip can take out and catch a lamb, catch a ewe, which needs to be pull the lamb or something, which is not always good for the training demos, because I always know when I get home and they've been catching sheep, because they always want to cut in a little bit closer than they should. So I probably know to your answer. We haven't really changed much, just breeding dogs maybe a bit more biddable, which is really important to be able to get dogs to listen and be in the right spot. I always say that a dog out of control is more hassle than, you may as well not have the dog in the yards if it's out of control. It's either over forcing, over pressure. There's too much tension between everybody, and people seem to lose their plot sometimes in the yards, whether it's at humans or it's at the dogs, sort of thing. Whereas if it's calm, it's in the right spot, things are happening. So I think we've got a good mix at the moment.
Yes.
I was just going to ask, like you said, you're picking pups for your clients. What sort of age are you transitioning them across to the new owners, and what are you doing with them beforehand to pick who goes where?
Who goes where? Great question, Laura. It's you might get the intro. So just understanding that one of the big things is seeing whether they're working in a pack themselves for a start, where they have 5 or 6 dogs. There's a different layout, or talking to cattle people who, as opposed to sheep people. A lot of sheep people maybe 2 dogs, 3, depending on where they're running. Whereas the cattle boys generally got 3 to 4. We've got some good friends there at Omea now. He's up to his 6th or 7th Kelpie. He thought he had good dogs before he started, and now we've raised the benchmark for him. And he just keeps going further and further. But he'll rarely leave. So he's at Omeo, so some really hilly country. He'll rarely leave without 4 dogs. So when I'm picking a pup for him, we've got to work out whether it's the one he needs to actually flank the cattle, or he wants something to actually just come in behind and push from the back. And so it's really understanding the job that's entailed. If it's sheep, do they really want a dog to be hard at the yards? Do they want something free barking? Do they want something a bit quieter? And so I'm really picking those pups from 5 to 8 weeks of age. So I'm seeing the temperament. Even when I'm tattooing the puppies, I look at those dogs and think, the level of the scream when I tattoo them is also how they react. And then, like, I just tattooed them and I put them all we put them back in the pen, and we sat there. Within 3 minutes of having the nasty tattoo gun, they were back playing with me again. They were all friendly and happy. So that sort of temperament's really important because that's what you got to work with during the day. Temperament's one of our key factors of having. They can relate and can bond and have that affection, and we can convey that affection back to them. Affection, and then from now on, between 6 and 8 weeks, we'll try and expose them to the sheep 1 or 2 times. Some nice lambs, soft lambs, just see if they get that heading instinct. So the yard at home's designed. It's a rectangle yard. It's not a round yard, and we have. Just to give them a bit of distance so they're not too close. Some people put them in too close and they get squashed early. So once they've started to run and wanted to do something, and we can see that heading instinct very quickly, normally 1 or 2 times, you can see they'll just squat. You show the eye. You can see their tail carriage. So tail carriage is, straight away you can see if they set, that's pretty much the way they're going to go. And you can normally count, 3 or 4 pups. One's really close, one's a bit out, one's a bit further. And you can nearly tell within how they're going to work with the paddock as opposed to the yard and then the bark. And I suppose the big thing there, Laura, is really looking back at the genetic pedigree again and saying, which way are they going to go? Are they going to be paddock work? Are they going to be yard work? Are those 2 dogs too bullish if a person's young and just starting for their first pup? There's heaps of questions that have got to roll through my mind, and I do get the old one wrong, and I'm sort of working through one at the moment that didn't work out, but it's just right going back and pick him as the best pup, but I just lacked an opportunity to express his working opportunity, but now he's coming through pretty well and running the race and free bark and just lacking a bit of polish out in the paddock at the moment. So back to that puppy stage.
You nearly need a questionnaire to audit your clients before you give them a pup, right? Like you really need to know their personality traits, who they are, what they want to do, like just away from the work as well.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is I sometimes probably assume too much that they're at home all the time with their dogs, but some people are working off farms, so they're not always working their dog and don't have the best opportunity. And so that's where I always try and encourage people to get five sheep, not old ewes, some young weaners, sheep, lambs or something that you can just work straight away, 5 or 10 minutes. They're just below the shed or below the house yard. Doesn't really matter where they are, but you can actually just put them in there and control the environment. We've got to have that pressure on, pressure release on that pup and feel as if the pup is always winning. So we've got to set ourselves up for success, not for failure. And the biggest thing is having confidence in the pup. You've got to have confidence in yourself to actually try. And the biggest part with a lot of training with other people around is people's own ego. People's own ego is the one that probably limits the dog's capacity because we're all afraid of flattening the fence as a jackaroo. We don't want to get the sack because our dog's gone mustered the stud rams or something. And so there's those little things are always something sitting on your shoulder saying, hey, don't do that, you'll get in trouble or anything. Whereas sometimes you just got to, if you do something wrong, you've got to accept it but give the dog a chance.
And let it make mistakes.
Let it make mistakes. You've got to take it with you. So my little pet trick really for young people taking a 8-week-old puppy, normally when it gets to that tie-out stage, maybe from 4 to 5 months, depending on individual confidence, is to have a little chain that you can take, put it around its collar so you can take it. So if you're doing a water run or you're taking it, you can actually clip the dog onto the back of the motorbike. Or if you take it and doing a laneway as they nearly get to the yards, you can still clip the dog on at the back of the yards and leave it there because it has a swivel snap at both ends. And so it'll always, it won't get through the fence, and it's short, can't hang itself, but at least whereas a rope or something tied up to a fence, if they want to twirl, they can still twirl. And the other advantage is if you actually have to catch a sheep, you can take the chain off the dog's neck and wrap its feet up and tie it up. So it does act as a little sheepcock as well.
I like the last
Yeah, I
bit.
like that. Do you want to get that one?
Because you never have a piece of rope in your back pocket or
Never.
the ute or something to tie that one fly-struck sheep or straggler or something.
90% of the time, even sometimes when I go out, I've always got a dog lead in my pocket. Like, always carry one. If I don't, I have a bit of bailing twine. Like, just always have something stashed in the pocket, just in case.
Bailing twine's like good for the contamination.
There's a question here from Lewis Godsell. He's asked, I know there are a number of Elfenvale Kelpies in Australia, as well as Canada, America, and Norway, that are competing in dog sports such as agility at a high level. Just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that history. Is there a reason Elfenvale Kelpies are preferred over different lines?
They've been used widely through that agility. I think one thing that the Kelpie is that the word Gaelic is meaning water sprite, so very light on its feet, so very nimble. The Kelpie's always speed is very quick, and their ability to learn is exceptional when you're actually doing a lot of traits and repetitive work. So they're always willing to please. The agility, they can jump, and once again, that's exposure, obedient, and a lot of that will to get to the other side, whether it's through a drum or over a river or something. And I think that's just the want to please all the time, and their concentration span is actually really good, and so that's why they just focus on the job at hand and obviously have a really good recall as well. And the short coatedness, their feet, their head, conformation wise, you get some of the Kelpies with a really short coat, pretty quick and lean and fast. So they do well.
It's funny you talk about them jumping. Like, remember the Scone trial this year? They had all these kids come, like during the week, and young Jimmy Marshall is there. We're just high jump over the back of the ute, and I had my Malamar there, and I thought, I'm a pretty good chance of taking this out. I was like, just in a break. Man, all three of his Kelpies cleaned me up proper. Like, it's just, and he just walks up, he just taps it, and they just jump up, and I'm there revving my Malamar up, and she just gassed out. And you talk there about like they're just keeping their head and just the way they're thinking, and when that's happening, they're not gassing themselves out physically or mentally at the same time, right? So I can see why dog sports love the Kelpie.
Yeah, and the other side of it is they are thinkers. Like, you think when they're out in the paddock or in scrub or bush, they're in Sweden. When they're working in Sweden, they're working 2 or 3 kilometres away, bringing the reindeer back. And then in Sweden, when Dad was over there, they actually grew an extra coat on their bellies, so because it was so cold. So they acclimatised themselves to it, which was just fascinating. And there was so they obviously adjust to their environment to suit themselves along the way.
Are you still sending dogs overseas?
We've sold a couple, not as many, and there's the odd inquiry, but not as many as probably years gone by. There's always a few trips. I never managed to get a trip to Sweden or anything. Dad was there's always often there's a couple of inquiries coming through.
What's the process for sending dogs to different countries? Is every country different?
I think. Yeah, I couldn't tell you the exact details down on it, but it's obviously far better going out of Australia than trying to come back into Australia. Obviously, if people take dogs away, when we did a couple of trips to America, we always took dogs that weren't going to return. I went to the Singapore Zoo back in the early 90s. That was a bit of fun. It took 2 dogs and 16 sheep to the Singapore Zoo. They had a new Australiana section that they were setting up, and I had to train a couple of people to train the dogs and then shear the sheep. And then they invited me to come back for the actual opening. And so one stage there, I think I had 7 or 8 snakes all hanging around me because they thought, well, if they've got the dogs, then you can have all the snakes over you as well. So it was really exciting to have that activity behind the scenes with all the elephant trainers and orangutans and everything. And then I had to teach them to shear the sheep. So I taught them to shear it. And then we, the old story, got the fleece and then pulled it over the head and then it just laid there. So obviously that's where the old pulling the wool over your eyes, and they were just couldn't believe that it just lay there until we took the wool off around their face. So and then we had to do a bit of whip cracking as well. Then one fellow thought I'd hold the cigarette in my mouth to so he could flick it out. And I thought I'll hold it in my hand, but not with my mouth. So there was a lot of fun. And the crazy thing was, so once they'd been there for three or 4 weeks, that it was in a sandy environment. They obviously got fairly dirty. And when I said I was coming back in November, they thought, oh no, they've all got dirty. So they proceeded to wash the 16 sheep with a scrubbing brush. And I went back there to shear them. I thought, oh, this is a bit tough. I said, is there anything happened to the sheep while I was away? Like, they just seemed very, very matted. Oh, yeah, we put them all in tubs and we scrubbed them up to try and get them all nice and white. But what they did was just matted the wool as best you could ever try. It was like trying to shear the wool off with a sledgehammer. I'm a reasonable shearer, but this certainly broke my ego anyway. So
I just imagine the sorry, Mr. Tom.
Well, the first few days, I think there was 16 people lining up to train the dog, and I sort of said after the first day, I said, now, who do you think would be actually working these dogs? Everybody came out from their office and all wanted to be part of it, so we narrowed it down to 2 people. But it was a lot of fun, and the dogs haven't sort of followed up where they've gone, but they're probably retired.
That would have been a fantastic 2-way. What's what I'm thinking of here? Educational, but based on them over there in year, culture shock is what we're like both ways. Like, that would have been a pretty cool experience.
It was amazing to be involved with it, and sorry, there's a little.
You're good.
Have we go back again? All good?
Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
All good. I'm really good on this technology. So the interaction and obviously quite a few of them, religion was involved with dogs or Muslim background, so they were not able to handle the dogs initially, and then after a while they were. So there was those barriers. It was amazing that they could handle the snakes with liberty, yet they were unable to handle the dogs. So there was that religion. Once they overcame that gap and work-related, they were good. So, and this is where we'll probably go to the next stage of training and talking a little bit of that as well. So obviously the language barrier straight away had to be overcome. And so once again, it was everything was done on body language. It was moving yourself to where you wanted the sheep to go, which is what we do with the dogs at that earlier age from sort of 8 weeks through to 6 months. And so once we put those commands on later on, they was within 3 or 4 days, they were able to, 2 dogs that I'd trained to sort of 12 or 14 months of age, they were actually able to quite well move those sheep through the yards, through the little arena, through a little obstacle, just by talking to them. Obviously we could overcome the sit commands. But also just that body language was, they interact. And they were dogs which, listen, they probably wouldn't have won your yard dog trials, but they were calm, they were gentle, they had a nice rapport with everybody, they were friendly. So they weren't your sort of big yard, you weren't going to put 3,000 sheep through the crutching trailer with them tomorrow sort of thing. So that's picking those dogs for those people. And obviously only working a few hours a day. They had to be biddable, had to be calm, and that's the sort of dogs we sent across, which worked well, and they were able to execute their sheep arena and in the arena and do their demos each day and go through from there. So it was good, but and that's where that training gap probably comes in. Going back to that other question, Laura, of picking up on the pups, getting people to expose them to the sheep 1 or 2 times a week or once a fortnight. A lot of discipline can actually be done away from the sheep. They don't always have to have the discipline at the sheep. So even those moments of feeding the dog that gets done every day, of that little sit and calm little tricks, I'm always an advocate of, hop up on the kennel, shake hands. It's that whole building that relationship with the dog away from the sheep. Then when you get to the sheep, you're on the way of putting that obedience back into the dog.
So for dogs you retain yourself, do you have a particular, do you like to see things at different stages, like milestones? Or you have just let the dog be?
I try and let the dog be its natural self, but still achieve those commands on as early as possible, whatever the dog can take. So it's about understanding how much pressure you can apply to the dog. Obviously, I'm probably leaning towards having dogs that are pretty bold, and obviously they've got to be giving demos to express their genotype and to utilise their phenotype. Obviously, doesn't always get expressed the same way. So when you're selling the dogs, the female side is carrying a lot more genes that aren't heritable from the male side. So that's why we put so much pressure on the females. And I think that's probably been a change of focus over the years. I know sheep breeders and other studs of breeds, bulls and everything, putting a lot more emphasis on the females because those genetics, only certain genetics are actually carried through the mitochondria genes, which are coming from the mother side. So I know we put a lot of emphasis on size and dogs, but at the same time, our females having those lines set up for 6 or 7 generations are really important that we have that purity coming through. So that's why you look at some of those pedigrees going back, and obviously I pulled a few out there, and having along the way you have an outcross there, but still the basis of coming back to some of that old bloodline is still there, Dan, which I think is really important. That would you go back and use some AI if we still had about? You probably would, to have that infusion coming back through.
Mm-hmm. You speak very much in science terms at times. Do you have a background with that?
No.
You've learned it all.
Yeah, if you want to talk mitochondria, that's about the only little bit about a mitochondria that Dad spent a lot of time on, and he's very knowledgeable on it. And the genetics side is amazing, and obviously he's passionate about it. That's as far as I really go, Laura, and that could be another talk for you. But it is interesting, the genetic side, but it's it is there, and it's understanding which traits are coming from where, which ones specifically I couldn't tell you, Laura, but there's just characteristics there that I think are really important. The females are sometimes underestimated. Mm-hmm. And that's where selection is. It's really hard to get. We have some really beautiful males, big heads, big strong dogs, and it just seems hard sometimes to get it back into the female. You do everything. Maybe they're the ones I sell. Maybe I need to wait for longer, which is what happened in the last 3 or 4 litters, which was really interesting. We had some good dogs at Casterton Kelpie auction, and they went really well. And they were dogs so we just keep them for a bit longer, so 5 or 6 months. And there's a few in the other litter of those litters at the same time we kept for 3 or 4 months. Things just went quiet, but it was really nice to have them to sort of 8 months of age and see how they developed as individual pups. And that was good to see those traits coming through, because normally they're sold as 8 to 12 weeks, and you only get to see the 1 or 2 that you select yourself. But seeing those other pups, and we had 5 or 6, and I suppose we were rewarded for obviously getting a little bit better price for them as well, because they were partly trained, and you can see how they develop and all their individual personalities coming through, and all 3 of them that guys have got now are just, they've actually taken their dogs to another level as well. So it's good to have them a bit longer. So maybe,
You go, sorry.
Sometimes maybe getting rid of them a bit earlier at 8 to 10 weeks. Everybody wants them straight away. That's the problem. They've paid the deposit. They said, well, we want the dog. We want it straight away. So clients' wishes are to, and it helps getting flying them around the country at eight weeks is good as well. They can be in Melbourne by 10 o'clock and in Western Australia by late afternoon and at somebody's place. So it's a pretty good turnaround, and the dogs travel really well.
So you're saying the bitch obviously to you is more important than the dog when you're looking at breeding, or not so much?
It is important. Both are important, but along the way, people have probably underestimated how much influence the female is. And so we've tried to keep these lines without too much change, so that we can have that purity coming through. And so, bitches having up to 5 or 6 pups, or 10, last couple have had 10 and 8s, but having 5 or 6 litters nearly to the same sire, is giving that purity all the way through. And then if you want to change, you might change a daughter there and put a different side to it that, maybe they're a bit hard, maybe we need to soften them a little bit. And so that's why I get excited by walking around and what we're breeding. There's one particular bitch that's a little bit sensitive, but yet her pups aren't expressing that, but they're really biddable. So her genotype's not been expressed as much as her phenotype. So just as a female, she's a bit sensitive, very powerful, very quick, agile. It's got all those traits, but she's just a little bit sensitive in her personality. But her pups are brilliant. So the sire is obviously carrying. He's got a beautiful personality. He's friendly. He's happy. It's actually George's dog, Maverick, and it's amazing with young trainers how some days they want to sell the dog, other days they think it's great. We sell him again, and I think he's been on the market 3 times or 4. We have a bit of a giggle within the family.
Your mum worked the shit on me for.
I think some days that's ego though, or working on large places with other people, and a lot of dogs. So it's been a good learning curve for George to have that dog come through and train him, and he's amazing what he can do with him as his first dog. He's very obedient. So that's the joy of breeding. It's the joy of being able to put dogs out in the industry that can influence and make people efficient. And we just keep trying to make each joining a winner, and breeding more dogs to satisfy the clients that are out there. And obviously it's a big industry now. You look at the dogs that are sold at Casterton, they do a wonderful job there. 60, 70 dogs each year at getting sold at Casterton, the Drillery. There's probably 4 or 5 major ones. I can't quite list them all off, the Lucendale one, but it's a lot of reward for people out there as well to be able to get reward for training dogs up and picking a team as well.
And for someone else, sorry, you're right.
I was just going to say even when back in the early 80s and 90s, we're often saying then that the dog should be is worth the value of $20,000 to $30,000, and it's probably taken nearly 20 years to get to that value for people to realise what a good dog's worth. And so we've probably always been a little bit ahead of our time of we were always setting the price, which is a little bit different to sometimes what we do with our other markets, our lamb or beef. But we've actually set the market and always been a bit of a benchmark for pups. But people have come on board and really appreciating to pay that next level now for those trained dogs, because time's valuable. Managers, there's not a lot of people out in the industry. The livestock industry is short of good stockmen at the moment. If you've got a good dog, if you're a young fella and got good with horses or motorbikes and you've got a team of dogs, there's a lot of work out there. So it's a huge opportunity for people in ag, whether it's agronomy, it's cropping, banking, business. It's a pretty good spot to be in at the moment. It's having a little lull at the moment, but it'll bounce back.
It will. Mate, for someone that puts so much emphasis on their bitch lines, when you do need to go outside, how are you doing your research, and how are you coming past dogs that you think you may use? And then what's the one that ticks the box for you to pick a particular dog?
Yep. So getting females in that have proven themselves in some old studs that have been around for a long time, and dogs that probably some of our areas were probably lacked a little bit of cast. We've probably been a bit direct on our cast. So do like a pear-shaped cast that a dog can sit on one side and then come around behind you and have a really nice pear-shaped cast and then come up on their stock. So getting dogs with a bit more footwork and cover, but be careful not to lose some of that push and force. Obviously, over the years, we've probably been renowned for having some sort of pushing dogs, but probably lacking a bit of cover or force. And I think we've got that back into some of the dogs. The other one, we've probably lacked a bit of size. We've got a little bit small there for a while. So there's another line we've got just a, he's a big fella. He's 28 kilos. But this is the new one on the ground. And Roger, but he's gentle giant, but jumps a fence. We were talking about agility there before. I think some dogs are gifted with jumping and others aren't, which maybe it's a confidence thing. He doesn't suffer any lack of confidence. And he'll jump on anything and jump over, but he's very gentle out in the paddock. He's very biddable. Nice bit of cover. Not the stalky, low down squat, but he just seems to shift the sheep. There's a lot of muscle about him, and he just has presence. So having that presence is really important. So Chester's probably a bit arrogant, but I think this young fella out of this bitch made it back to old Rexy. Rex is not flash for eye, but he's just very biddable and really good to work. Anybody can work him. So the kids actually think he's meant to be the yard dog, but he's turned out to be the paddock dog in the last couple of years. So it's just because you can put him anywhere. He's got beautiful heading instinct. He does go a bit far on some of them in a cast, but he'll always come back to you, ready for the next order.
So when you're looking outside there, like for studs outside of yours, do you always go to, you mentioned Effenpart earlier, do you always go towards that line, or is there other stuff like you watching and looking around, or
probably in the last probably 8 years since I've been working off farm, I probably haven't done a lot of looking around. We've probably got some dogs within the lines that we're happy with our variety that's here. And if I probably go out too far, then we get too many different lines, and then we can't predict what's going to happen. So I'm probably fearful of not being able to predict what I can produce.
Yep.
And so I suppose that's always a danger, going outside the square and not knowing the area what you're going into. So predictability. So we're still supplying. We've still got quite a few orders for dogs, and we just need to be careful not to get too many different lines happening without keeping to our old lines. Mm-hmm. Or choosing within. Another thing, Dan, is probably choosing within individual dogs those traits that we can develop on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mate, I got a question for you here. Did you ever feel any pressure taking the stud over from your dad?
No, I've always had a love for the dogs, and when my brother and I were in partnership, I was probably a little bit leaning towards the livestock dogs. He was on the VE machine. We produced a VE machine, which is a drenching machine for drenching sheep. So he was on the end of that. He's very mechanic, likes livestock as well. So he was up the physical end. So I was able to have a good team of dogs. Actually had a fair few females, had 5 or 6 females in that team. And we were quite often drenching 1,500 sheep an hour between the two of us through a VE machine, which is quite big numbers. And so with that job at hand, we were able to have a pretty good team. There's just constant work. So the old analogy is that there's nothing like a good day's work to train a dog. You can train as many dogs as you want on 10 or 15 sheep, but until you get onto some big mobs and some big days, that's when you really get a dog to think about what he's got to do. And if you can make your dog number one, then he'll step up and go those places. So so that's opportunity as well. Working those numbers and sheep wise, obviously not working the numbers we used to, but like the other day, it was quite embarrassing that the yards flow quite well, but we drafted 1,300 sheep without a dog. Is that a sin? I'm not sure. But that's just how well the yards flowed. So there was no room for the dog. They just kept coming through. So that was in about 40 minutes. So that was quite impressive.
How did you get into designing yards?
So that was an opportunity that came up. Obviously, our families went our own way, and I just had a. It's a bit like breeding dogs as well. It's just wanted to put something back into the livestock industry, and I thought I could help the company, and it came easy to me to actually be able to go on farm and talk to people, see what their problems were, listen to what they actually wanted to change. And so I found it quite similar to actually selling them dogs, that it's about listening to what people want. And it's the same in the yard design. If they wanted a double race or they wanted to handle 4,000 or 5,000 sheep, then they got a design to suit 4,000 or 5,000 sheep. But if they're only working 300 sheep, and that's what you designed them, you worked with what they needed to. So, and I enjoyed that because it actually it helped improve their efficiency. I think our whole job in the livestock industry at the moment is how do we become more efficient? And that's the 2 tools I see at the top of the list at the moment really are having a great dog, a well-bred dog, a well-designed set of sheep yards, and a willing labour force who want to work. And at the moment, our family workforces really are our number one team on the farm, whether it's husband and wife, partners, sons and daughters, in the right space. And it seems often that the sheep yards were a space where people were able to yell at each other or send the odd bad words across the top of the yards when a gate came open, or didn't you tie that gate open? But there's normally a few explicits in between, and that just came naturally, I think. So it's nice to be able to go back and see some of those clients and say, how's the atmosphere, and probably saving marriages as well.
And look, 10 years, 57 years, Offenbach would have already been around. So I'm predicting that it would have been a lot of familiar faces as well, right? Existing clients.
Yeah, so
it was people like dogs, your dogs already.
Yeah, so it was and that's where they complemented each other, the 2 jobs. So if I hadn't sold them a set of yards, I did, or if I'd sold them a dog, I sold them a set of yards. And
always have it up on the back of the ute when you go around. I think it's yards.
Yeah, so it worked both ways. So it was pretty good. So some guys I think came back for their 6th set of yards, and some guys are on their 6th or 7th dog. So it's the whole two is about building relationships, families working together. It's just been part of the team. It's not just me. It's what's been happening over the last 60 years, and the livestock game, sheep yards, and the dogs has been wonderful, and being able to work at home is even special. So I was actually always worked from home in the last 10 years. So even during COVID, it was nothing new to be at home. So it was good.
Absolutely. Mate, you mentioned earlier you mentioned some different dogs. There's Ben and a couple other dogs. Were there any particular dogs that have really stood out for Eltham Vale over the 67 years?
Yeah, I think
might not even be dogs that everybody else knows about, but something that really stood out for yourself as well.
Yeah, I suppose early on in the breeding, I suppose I wasn't right up to speed with some of the early ones going right back, but probably during the childhood and growing up, Ben had probably a lot of influence when you look at around Australia, and a lot of his pups. Another dog, Eltham Vale, Sid, and this is another classic. So I've even got the pedigree in front of me. Just amazing, isn't it? So Sid was by Geraldine Alistair out of Eltham Vale Sawker, and so Geraldine Alistair went back to Glenlogie Bess.
Yeah.
So that one outcross of Glenlogie Bess went back to a Baron Bogey Mac. Baron Bogey Mac was a wonderful dog. Steve Wayman, I think, had him. A lot of fellas would relate to that. And Kirrabilla Lucky. So Glenlogie Bess was mated to Eltham Vale Tim to breed this Geraldine Alistair, who I think might have won. We bought him. And I can't remember the owner now. It's been a while. But I think he won 14-yard dog trials. So he was very biddable. You could move him on a 20-cent piece. He had really dark eyes, but he wasn't the best caster. Sometimes he'd actually lose his stock or wouldn't watch. But and then he bred this dog, Sid, and he was very influential. He was a dog similar that could just move around. Mum would work him, I would work him, everybody would work him, and he just bred a lot of good pups. And probably one of my earlier dogs after Jackaroon was Eltham Vale Sam, who he was bred a lot of pups, but he was a dog you could work in the paddock. He's really nimble, not the biggest dog, but he had a beautiful shotgun bark, and yet he could go and work 3 sheep, but he would just run all day up and down the VE machine, down the race. I'm not a big fan of dogs backing the races. I just think they just get smashed and crushed. It's ego involved, but it's not efficient. I mean, you get a dog that can run the race all day, every day. They're just they're quick. So he was good at that. And I suppose you look at some of the earlier lines. I go back to the females. Laurie, you probably think I've jumped the ship now. I've changed foot into the Campbell. I talked about his male size, but so that Samantha line were pretty impressive. Socks, one particular family, they had 3 of the females there over the years. Samantha, Socks, and then Salita. So so they were good. And Lizzie, old Lizzie, Eltham Vale Lizzie. She thinks she had 10 litres, might have been. She bred beautiful, just consistent dogs back to Ben, Lizzie. They were always ordered before the pups were born. I think they were $1,000 back in those days. And even the price, people thought, when we were at field days, they'd often come up, down and buy the most expensive pup first. It was quite incredible.
Yeah. Walk around the whole day with their chest out, going, we got the most expensive pup in there.
Yeah. But the field days were another world. I remember going to Gunnedah field days in 1984. Agquip, you're spot on.
Yep.
Agquip, we took 40-odd dogs in the first couple of years, and by 3 o'clock on the third day, we'd sold every pup, and all we had was just demo dogs. It used to cost us about $4,000 or $5,000 for the site. We'd have 4 sites. We'd go up about 3 days before, build these fences and yards, and live on site on the caravan, which was wonderful. Mum would cook us a feed and 2. Yeah, so that was those days were quite incredible, selling that amount of dogs in 3 days.
Just unbelievable, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and so now we're pretty special to be able to still be breeding dogs and now have them at home and not have to go to the field days. Obviously saves cost, but Pip and I have built like horse stables, and it's just magnificent. They're all on sand, and we can muck them out each morning. I say that's the royal we too. I get shot for saying we.
Listen back and go.
But it's good. They're on beautiful sand, and it's beautiful environment for the pups, and they play and clean, and then the mothers big kennels in there to lounge around and feed them. So it's good, and little doors at the front, which obviously two little half doors, so the puppies don't get out. You can open the door and climb in there without the pups all getting out, which works a treat. And then the mothers can just jump out over the top and go for a walk, and while we feed the puppies, so they have feeding time. So it's probably another thing we haven't discussed is the feeding of dogs. Some people into the pack feeding, and I was only thinking about it today driving around the truck, that it's amazing when they're up until 8 weeks of age, they all sort of pack feed with puppies and runts and litters. And then when you go to older age, they go back to being fed individually. But it's amazing the characters you can find along the way. If that little runty, which is in every litter, if they survive the first 3 days, they're pretty powerful. And then if they get through to the 2 or 3 weeks, they're even more powerful. And quite often the runts are very dynamic and very tenacious and solid workers. So they create their own little characters as well. And the big bullies sometimes are the ones that go to boisterous people.
Yeah.
Mate, while we're talking about pups there, you mentioned about on sand, and one thing you always hear about on through social media channels is bedding for pups. What's your poison of choice, so to speak? What do you guys like whelping boxes?
Yeah, so we've got a whelping box. So in the kennel, we've got a nice big kennel that I can nearly get into, so it's a reasonable size. And then so when they're having the pups, we'll either put some blankets down, and just so it absorbs the afterbirth and while they're getting cleaned up, and then we'll move that out change that each day for a couple of days, and then move them back once everything's healthy and cleaned. We'll pull them out, and then put the straw back in there. Nice bit of long straw is nice that they just keep warm and it keeps them clean. And then to the side of that, we built just a little square box that's just a 6x1.5 boards, and it just sits on the sand. You can pull a blanket out, put them in there, and just check them, and they dry. Because sometimes in the kennel, if it's a big litter, it just sweats. It gets humid, and so sometimes it's nice. We can nearly put it in front of the kennel, and then the bitch can lie there. You can lie them down and just make sure she can stretch right out. And then, especially this litter with Penny, she's had 10 pups, and she's just looked after them beautifully. So you can lay them down, especially with a bit of warm weather, to actually make sure that they're actually drinking and everyone's getting a suckle. Because it's nearly the case you nearly need to change them over, because Fatty wants to keep getting the milk and starts pushing them off. So it's a full-time job, just making sure the little ones are getting that colostrum in those first 24 hours is really critical.
What are you doing beforehand and afterwards to keep the bitch healthy and enough milk?
Yeah. So what Pip's done with Penny, we use her as an example. A lot of feed coming up to it, dry nuts, and making sure that they're nearly 3 feeds a day. So in the morning, just a little bit of pal put through it, just so it's palatable on the nuts, and mixed up with a little bit of milk. And the other one that's been really nice is also if their intake is actually giving them rice, which gives them that filler so they can fill their bellies, and then that again in the evening. So full-time job mixing, and sometimes a little bit of mince put through it, mince and rice put through, just so it's palatable, they get that, and you can measure that intake. You can see what they're consuming, whether they need more or less, depending on their intake, and having, not that we haven't. I actually thought she might only had 6 or 7, but she ended up nearly having 10, or had 10. So over reasonable size birthing.
And you hear stuff all the time about calcium tablets and stuff. Are you guys into that or do that?
Haven't done much haven't done any on the calcium side of it. I think just having a well-balanced nutrients, sometimes they can go off the nuts. So sometimes that little bit of PAL, just to give it quick uptake, just so you can keep it palatable on the nuts. And I think you nearly sort of need to be sort of 2 weeks before they're about to have the pup, so she can be in good shape, and just having that nice condition on them is really important. And obviously we're feeding the puppies little puppy nuts, which is obviously softer for them to break up, and also giving the mothers those puppy nuts, which have obviously got more nutrients in it than the working dog food.
So, and when your bitches or your normal dogs obviously aren't in the whelping boxes, are you using off the ground kennels? Do you have your dogs on the ground? Have you got a preference?
Preference is really still on the ground with a nice kennel and chain, so that they can go into shade. I still find in the winter sometimes it can get a little bit muddy. That's where the kennel comes in. They'll go into the kennel. But in the summer and the warm months, the dogs actually still enjoy sitting in the dirt because it's nice, naturally cool. Some dogs that are a little bit runny that are taking the weight off if they're working the chain too much, then we can put them into just a raised kennel, which is the old Melwire. The Melwires, these kennels are, they'd have to be 40-year-old. But it's Melwire, and so they're actually self-cleaning, whereas the timber kennels, you actually have to wash daily because the manure actually gets stuck between the timber, whereas the Melwire, which is nearly a 16 mil square, the dogs actually push the manure through, and then every day, Pip, not I, comes through. I was going to say we, but I thought I would just we pick up the manure every day, so there's no dung around, and it's really clean and doesn't smell, and it just goes into a pit. Good question for you, Back, or somebody listening may be able to tell me, but the dung beetles for the dogs, are they the same as the dung beetles for the sheep? It's amazing how quickly they can act. So if you leave a bit of manure there and they're active, it could be 2 to 3 days and the manure's nearly disappeared. It's amazing. Yep. So I don't know whether they're the same dung beetles as the sheep. I keep meaning to ask vets, but they can't tell me. So I'll put one back on you.
Yeah, I can't answer that one.
You're right.
And the kennel and the kennel, nice board on the front, and that just keeps the wind in, keeps the straw in. We still love our straw. Put the straw in. There's nothing more cozy than some nice long straw in the kennels. The dogs just love to burrow into it and snuggle into it, and it keeps it warm and a nice either bit of red gum timber with a roof on it. It's pretty ready down here in our country. It's amazing what you can knock up with a nail gun and a few tech screws. And they're our homes. Even kennels with a good 44 plastic lining in the bottom. It keeps it nice and dry, stops the wind, and then you can have the wooden frame around it. The dogs can snuggle in there. It's easy to clean out, and it's sort of a shelter. They were actually some old feed huts we made, but converted them into dog kennels, and you can move them around. You can tow them with a motorbike, and they're on sleds. You can just tow it around if you want to.
Yep. And after 1,252 litters, mate, what is it that keeps you breeding pups? Or what do you love about the breeding? Obviously, you love your genetics as well.
Just still trying to breed that great dog. and it's still out there in front. They haven't quite done it yet. And if we can improve and help other people in the livestock industry to make them more efficient, then we're all on the same platform, and it's benefiting everybody. And it's a reward of seeing these pups hit the ground and seeing what we can do. And it's just satisfying to when you're working livestock and you see these young dogs, how quickly they can come on and improve your day, make your day better, their mates as well as working dogs. And they still only ask for a little bowl of dog food each day, and they're companions with us. And when you're having a bad day, they're there to listen to you every day or smooch up to you, and it's pretty amazing.
And a handshake from, who was that?
Chester.
Chester, that's it. Yeah.
And a kiss.
And a kiss, that's right.
He's a smoocher.
Mate, you mentioned tonight a couple of times, like your pedigrees and a box of paperwork you've had there. When you've obviously done a little bit of preparation for tonight, when you've got that stuff out, has it sparked any memories or anything that you've just gone wow, or just any emotion or just particular memory from going through some of that?
Yeah, there's one there that Eltham Vale Tess, and she was amazing. And for whatever reason, we just didn't seem to keep many pups out of her, and it's really sad. She was a beautiful red female. And there's just nothing of her lines. Or the lines are still there, but not of her individually. So she went back to Eltham Vale Tom, and he's been really influential over the last 12 or 14 years. He's obviously goes back to 4 generations going back to Chester. The other one I wrote down, obviously, my children are the 4th generation on the farm. And then I actually wrote down at the moment, which is not often you get to see, and obviously we've got a field day coming up on the 9th and 10th, we're training, but people will actually be able to see 4 generations of dogs in the yards on one day. So we've got good old Buster, and then we come down to Chester, then we come down to Larry, and then we come down to Toby. So old Buster's nearly 14. He'd be cruising around on the back door asleep at the moment. You can't hear, but he's got an amazing nose and still knows where his dog Tucker is. But he's still got a beautiful big bark. He's got huge feet. He's just a massive, massive dog. But he never jumped, Daniel. He was always a dog who actually went through the rails sideways, flat out. Doesn't matter how big he was, but he fitted between the 4th and 5th rail. I don't know what happened when he didn't fit, but he was just amazing. Like a fox, he'd just turn on his side. He never seemed to jump, but he had a beautiful big booming bark, and still got it. A little bit slow on his pins at the moment, but so that's pretty impressive, I think, seeing 4 generations of working dogs on the farm as well.
Actually, some of your dogs there, how many generations would they actually be? Dogs, I'm assuming they go back like a lot.
Yeah, so it depends how far you want to go back. I mean, Chester's one of the older fella, or Buster's the oldest fella. So I don't know how far you go back to him. So he's 14 years old, and then he goes back to his parents' line. So there's, I haven't counted it all.
And a bit stacked, like
yeah.
You'd have to just sit down and just go through it. Like, it'd be amazing.
I don't think it'll fit on this. I don't think it'll fit on the desk here. I think I'll have to be like that fish story. It's how long is it?
And you mentioned earlier about like preparing dogs for, I know Caston's one of your preferred sales there. What have you got a particular age that you want to have the dog there, and how much training would you actually put into that, or would you like to leave it a little bit more natural?
Excuse me. What happens at Casterton is a little bit influenced by natural births at the time. So normally we've gone on the younger side than actually having something fully trained. the fully trained dogs, I think nearly need to be 2+ and pretty clever. Time's expensive, so sometimes the effectiveness of having a dog that's 4 to 5 months, and I suppose being off farm a fair bit and not working the numbers, it's those dogs that are 18 months need a lot of work daily to have them polished. And so I'm probably more inclined to put the 12-week-old puppy in, bit of natural instinct, and then let people take it, which is what George did. And then I'd probably sit with a dog that's probably 6 to 7 months, ready to go, but not broken in.
Yep.
And that's probably the most cost effective, but rewarded at that time. But if things change going forward and you get an 18-month-old dog that you can knock into shape, it's just more the point that most of the pups are gone at an early age, Daniel. So I've probably got to keep dogs for a little bit longer and allocate them to Cassidy and put that time into it. I have done it before where I've worked a 12-month-old dog in there. I thought he's pretty handy. A lot of other people thought he was too busy and he was hard to work, and I didn't work him very well, and I didn't have that control. So that was probably a bad reflection on myself when I look back at the videos, and all I did was call Ted out 24,000 times. But he was very strong, and he did go away after that, but he bred some powerful dogs, and it was probably a wrong move actually selling him, but these things happen along the way and you breed them again. But he was busy, and that reflected in not selling him. He got passed in, so that was a reflection on my behalf, so that's probably bad.
Mate, what advice would you give to someone that wanted to purchase their first pup or first dog?
The first pup, you want to be able to have the work for it, or be able to allocate the time and make it a friend, make it a companion. If you want it to be a working dog, obviously you need to be able to teach it. There's parameters for what you want to do, and you want to have confidence in yourself that things aren't going to work out well every time. So be prepared for failure, but set yourself up for success, if that makes sense. Things aren't always going to go wrong, but you've got to be prepared to take him on the jobs. And that's where that little chain on the collar, so you take your old dog and you take him with you, but if you never take him, he's never going to learn. And so the secret out there is don't try and take the young pup when you've got 4 crutches yelling out for sheep, or your boss is giving you a couple of thousand sheep to drench or something. Use him at the end of the day when you're driving down the laneway nicely and you don't have the pressure. Don't put added pressure onto yourself by using the train pup. Sure, have him on the race and let him run the race, but have position where, like I was training one yesterday, it was only 6 months old, but we drenched 300 ewes. I just had a little clip so that you can actually put it onto a box. So that's where it learns to sit in the yards. That's the switch off position, and it learns to sit and be quiet, because you can't get to it when you're in the middle of the race trying to drench a mob of sheep. So set yourself up for success, and don't put too much pressure on them in the yards, because some sheep will squash them.
Yeah, I like that. Is there anyone you'd like to see us sit down and have a chat with on Dog Talk?
I didn't do my pre-work on that one.
That's right. Nothing comes to mind now, mate. You can always flick us a message later. That's cool.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Not a problem, mate. Mate, we really appreciate your time tonight. Know that there's plenty happening in the family tonight with sports and whatnot, and we're going to let you go. But before we do that,
as always, would you rather fight one duck the size of a horse or 20 horses the size of ducks?
Just say the question again, Laura. I missed the first bit.
One duck the size of a horse, or 20 horses the size of ducks, and why?
I'll probably go the horses. Work with the horses than the ducks.
Well, go for the big one. Sorry, go for the little ones. I suppose you got a few dogs around there, mate, so you can work all the horses around.
Yeah, no, I would do that. Just ducks are unpredictable.
Yeah, especially a big one.
That's it. Tom, thank you very much for your time tonight, mate. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks for jumping on. To everyone listening back, please remember we learn every day, and the day we stop learning is a sad one for all of us. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.